Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Cogent Social. This is Ajay Behl. I have a distinguished guest of mine, and his name is Tim Greimel. He's the current mayor of Pontiac, Michigan, and he is going to be running for the House. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over, and Tim and I are just going to go through some questions. Obviously, being a mayor and then now running for a larger seat, he'll explain some of the issues that he's had, some of the things that he's done, and then what he feels, could be possibilities of the future changing over here. Okay? All right, Tim.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, AJ. It's great to see you. Really appreciate the great work you do with this podcast. And as you said, my name's Tim Greimel. I'm running for Congress in the 10th congressional seat. It's the seat that includes much of Macomb County and part of Oakland County. And I was born and raised in the congressional district, graduated from high school in the congressional district, and ultimately went off to college, majored in economics, and got a master's in public policy and a law degree, and then returned home to my hometown in Rochester, where I was elected to the local school board. So I was elected to the local school board in Rochester at the ripe old age of 26, served there while practicing as an attorney, and was later elected to the Oakland County Commission as well, representing Rochester Hills and some of the neighboring communities. And I became a civil rights attorney and union-side labor lawyer, and worked hard standing up for people in the workplace against employers who were discriminating against them or not giving them the wages and benefits that they deserved and were owed under the law, and enjoyed that work, but ultimately ran for the state house in the Michigan legislature. I was elected to that position, served as the state house Democratic leader for 4 years, and I'm very proud of what we were able to accomplish by working across the aisle and working with members of both parties to increase the state's minimum wage and index it to inflation for the first time in Michigan history. And we also were able to successfully expand Medicaid coverage to provide health insurance to 700,000 Michiganders who had previously lacked any health insurance or health coverage. So we were able to get a lot of great things done during that time period. I'm currently serving as the mayor of Pontiac, and we've been able to bring hundreds of housing units to Pontiac. We're very excited about the progress we're making in getting hundreds of housing units under construction. We've dramatically reduced shootings and the murder rate in the city. The murder rate is down over 70%, 70%, since I took office 3.5 years ago. We also are about to break ground on a community center, which will be breaking ground here in just the next month. It'll have a particular focus on youth recreation and youth enrichment to give young people constructive things to do and constructive outlets. And then perhaps most importantly, we are bringing at least 600 Oakland County employees into downtown Pontiac as part of a redevelopment project that includes demolishing the old Phoenix Center parking garage, which has been derelict and dilapidated for years, and the county is renovating a long vacant and abandoned office building. So they're going to be moving the county executive's office there, county commissioner's office is there, and at the same time working with a private developer to bring more housing downtown and bring more retail downtown as well. So a lot of exciting things have been happening in Pontiac.
One of the things I want to talk about, obviously, is the lack of opportunities, the education system, right? There seems to be a great breakdown, specifically within these inner cities. Yeah. How do you address that going forward?
Yeah, it's incredibly challenging. It's both incredibly important, but it's also incredibly challenging. Yeah. And, I have some background in education as a 7-year school board member in the Rochester School District and as the former school board president in the Rochester School District. And there's a lot more that school districts need to do to really step up to the plate and deliver results to students. But there's a lot more the community overall needs to do too, including, of course, parents and other guardians really need to be more engaged in young people's lives. So it really, the old adage, it takes a village to raise a child, that is certainly true, and it's certainly true in the school district setting. In Michigan, mayors, unfortunately, don't have any direct control or authority over school districts. It's all determined by the elected school board and then the superintendent that elected school boards hire. But we have reached out and tried to work with the local school district in Pontiac. We have had collaborative efforts with the school district in Pontiac, including some youth recreation and enrichment activities at elementary schools throughout the school district, where the city has run programming, after-school programming at elementary schools. There's a lot more that we would like to do in partnership with the school district, but sometimes it's hard to break down some of those barriers that arise between different levels of government. So the city, I can tell you, stands ready to work in partnership with the school district in any way that we can, because we know that any city won't be truly successful until its school district is successful and until young people really have all of the opportunity that they need to succeed in life. It's one of the reasons why the city of Pontiac has ramped up our own enrichment programming. We're launching a robotics program through the city, which we're really excited about. The city council
Is that a STEM program?
Well, it is a STEM program. It's,
Okay.
Robotics really is all about making sure that students are both exposed to math and science, but then are able to implement it in a hands-on way through robotics competitions. And City Council just approved that program in its last City Council meeting. We're thrilled to be able to offer that to people of all ages, especially young people. And
I had both boys go through that.
Oh, that's great.
Tremendous.
It really is.
I went to all the meets all over. They all compete. But it's great because it fosters innovation.
Exactly.
Which is what we're missing in a lot of these kids. And I'm glad to hear you say, these after-school programs, I think they're so important.
They really are.
Because they give these children don't have like a hope. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
This kind of gives them some spark. So because you have to keep these kids engaged somehow.
Well, that's right.
So.
It's incredibly important. And when I talk about the new community center we're about to break ground on in a month and a half, when I talk about our expanded youth programming, I'm not just talking about sports and athletics. Yes, we offer sports and athletics, but we offer art classes, music classes, tutoring programs.
Very diverse.
Yes, it's really important that we give people, no matter what the young person's interest, no matter what they're into, that they're given an opportunity to constructively pursue their interests. And that's one of the things, too, that I think school districts everywhere need to do a better job of, is really offering different instructional paths for students. Not every student is going to go to college. Certainly, I went to college. We want to make sure more kids are going to college. But there are a lot of good-paying jobs out there that don't require a college education. Sure. If people
trades,
right? Exactly, that's exactly what I was going to say, skilled trades. There's a shortage of folks in skilled trades. That shortage is going to become more acute as a lot of skilled trades individuals retire. And for those who aren't going to go to college, you can get a great job and make a great living and have a great career by being a skilled electrician, being a skilled plumber or pipe fitter. And we want to make sure that we're opening up more of those avenues to our young people too.
I also think that there's a big shift in the labor market from the automotive industry. The automotive industry's completely redeveloped themselves.
That's right.
So if we don't have more skilled people,
absolutely,
you can't even work in a factory. I remember when my father, it's like 35, 40 years ago, a lot of his friends, just got a job. They were making good paying money. That's not the case these days. Right.
That's very true.
It's upskill and reskill.
That's 100% right. It's, we want to make sure that our young people are getting the higher education and skills training that they need, but we also want to open up those avenues and those paths to older people who need to reskill because the jobs that they used to have either are going away or just don't pay what they used to pay. And actually a lot of those auto jobs that are still around and that do pay decently in plants require some advanced skill training. Yeah. So, the days when somebody could graduate from high school or maybe drop out of high school and walk down the block and get a good paying job for life in an auto plant are really gone. And now people need some advanced training. They don't necessarily need to go to college, but they need some advanced training to fill those good paying jobs in factories that are available today.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also want to just step back a little bit. I've noticed since COVID, after COVID, some of the scores for the reading, the mathematics.
Exactly.
It's sad, but it's dramatically declined, actually.
It really has. So. And, I think, I think decision makers during COVID were given a lot of slack by the public because was the first major pandemic that the country has faced in 100 years at the time, going back to really the flu pandemic in the early 1900s. But having said that, I think governments got some things right during that time, but they also got some things wrong. And I think shuttering schools for the incredibly long period of time the schools were shuttered really was the wrong approach at the time, because the learning loss that students suffered and the lack of socialization that they experienced, we're going to be paying that price, I think, for generations to come because of how it detrimentally impacted students.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the collateral damage that happened. And I can say that because my sons both went through it.
Yeah.
They actually lived it. And I saw that degradation. Now they're doing fine, both of them. But
Good.
It took a little while for that to come back up again.
Well, for sure. Yeah, I was not on a school board at the time. And I understand that school boards had difficult decisions to make. But certainly in retrospect, I think it was a major mistake for schools to remain closed for so long.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree with you at this point, looking back at it. I know you talked a little bit about healthcare expansion and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, explain that, because today there still is a lot of people that don't have healthcare.
Well, that's sadly the case. And, we had a system before the Affordable Care Act passed where it was really only the very low income individuals who qualified for Medicaid. And so a lot of people who didn't get health insurance through their work, who couldn't otherwise get or afford health insurance, were left out. And typically they were higher income people who were working. They were the working poor, and they were excluded from the system. So when we expanded Medicaid here in Michigan, we were really providing health insurance to people who mostly were working but weren't making enough to be able to afford to buy health insurance on their own and weren't getting it through their employer. And so it's a population that I'm particularly sympathetic with, because these are people who are working hard, they're playing by the rules, and yet they're not getting proper health insurance.
And that's the subsidiary act, right, where they get the credit? Is that the one you're referring
Well,
to?
yes. And what we did was we expanded the Medicaid eligibility rules to cover higher income people. Now, there's also the exchange, which the Affordable Care Act created, and that's more of a national exchange that was created. But we also expanded Medicaid so that people who are still relatively low income but had been making too much money to qualify for Medicaid in the past can now qualify for Medicaid.
Maybe you could do something with the education so we can control tuition a little bit.
Well, you're so right that tuition at colleges and universities has gone way
What are your thoughts
out of
about
hand.
that? I'm just curious. Have you looked into why is that? Because if you go to California or you even go to Texas, some of these places, they have actually controlled tuition, and it seems like ours is.
Well, I advocated when I was in the legislature that for public universities that get state dollars, the state really needs to tie public appropriations, taxpayer dollars that are given to universities and colleges to tuition restraint. So, yes, the state needs to invest in higher education, but an investment in any one college or university is contingent on that college and university controlling tuition inflation, because it's gotten so out of hand, and it really, I don't think, is rational. I think some of this is driven by the fact that a lot of universities and a lot of colleges are somewhat insulated from the normal competitive pressures that you see, say, at a typical retail service, or when you go to the grocery store. When you go to the grocery store, you buy different cereals. There's some generic versions, taste pretty similar to the brand name versions. You have pretty broad choice, and everybody can kind of pick the cereal they want. I think whether it's accurate or not, people believe that education at certain schools is virtually priceless in value. There are people who say, well, I want to go to the University of Michigan or Michigan State. I don't want to go to, you name the other university that doesn't have that solid of a reputation. And as a result, some of these schools can charge a lot of money, and they're not really pressured to restrain prices the same way most other goods or services are under pressure to constrain prices, because there's this view that some universities and colleges are so much better than others that it's almost priceless, the services they provide. And obviously that's not really accurate.
Right.
Everything is about return on investment. Everything is about benefits and costs.
Sure.
But I think there are enough people who don't perceive it that way, or or who aren't very price sensitive when it comes to going to colleges, that they're willing to pay a lot, even if the return on investment maybe isn't truly there in terms of the amount of salaries that those jobs
And I think there's
deliver.
another dynamic that's going on. I went to Michigan State University. I graduated a while ago.
Yep.
And at the time, tuition was very reasonable,
Yes.
actually. And there was a lot of co-op. There's work programs. A lot of those have gone away now.
Right.
So how do we get that back? How do we get that balance back in?
Yeah, I think there are a couple approaches here that are important. One is, I think funding to, again, public funding, state funding to colleges and universities should be conditioned on reasonable tuition rates in exchange for that. That's essential. I think also the federal government needs to do more in terms of Pell Grants to make sure that Pell Grants are available to more students and that they cover more of the tuition costs and other costs that students face.
Well, that's just it. The Pell Grant is very limited in terms of the scope that it covers.
Exactly.
It's basically books and tuition,
Yep.
but the ancillary costs.
Rent and housing and food. Exactly.
And they don't have any way unless they're working. Now you're working full time, and I'm okay with working, but
Sure.
You're a student. You've got a full class load, and it's tough to try to manage all that stuff.
Well, for sure. It's really tough, I think, for someone to juggle a full-time job while going to a 4-year university on a typical course load. And so I think the federal government, through an expansion of Pell Grants, really can be part of the solution, especially for low and moderate income students who otherwise just can't afford it.
Yeah, I just, and even these 508 plans, and I think they're underfunded. Again, one man's opinion,
Right.
but I don't think they're keeping up with the level of inflation.
Yeah.
And even the guaranteed student plan, I think, is a little bit underfunded. And so that's an issue, right?
100%. I mean, I think we need to, and the 508 plans are great and they provide some generous tax incentives.
Right.
But I think there's more that can be done to expand those, to expand the flexibility of those. I know the federal government has recently tweaked some of the eligibility guidelines so that, if one's kid doesn't end up using all of the funds for college, it can still go to the parents' retirement, things like that. I think that sort of flexibility can be helpful in terms of encouraging people to invest more in those tax incentive educational plans.
Yeah, and some parents just don't have the extra income to put into those programs.
Exactly.
I mean, they're living paycheck to paycheck. How are you going to tell them, you need to only put in $100 a month in, that...
Exactly.
That's
that's right.
Especially today's cost of living. That's the other thing.
Right.
Michigan's a great place, but our cost of living has gone up.
Well, that's true, and that's true, across the country,
Yeah.
obviously, but it hits especially hard here at home. And you're right, people are getting squeezed. The middle class has been getting squeezed more and more in recent decades, and I think that's never been more acute than now, when you see prices skyrocketing in recent years and wages just haven't kept up. And it's really the reason why I got into politics and started both representing workers as an attorney, but also why, as an elected official, I've really championed the middle class, because the middle class keeps getting squeezed harder and harder every year. And so the American dream that my 4 grandparent immigrants came to this country for is increasingly harder for Americans to attain. And we need to do everything we can to strengthen the middle class, to make it easier for people to stay in the middle class, and to make it easier for new people to actually achieve the middle class American dream.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So now let's fast forward. Now you're running for this, house. What can we expect from Tim?
Well, you're gonna hear me focused on bread and butter, pocketbook economic issues. As I just said, the middle class is getting squeezed harder and harder. And the federal government can either be part of the problem or they can be part of the solution. And the federal government and governments at all levels need to be more of the solution. In some cases, that's about government getting out of the way. The federal government needs to make sure that red tape's being cut for small businesses, that small businesses have an easier time of doing business, of growing, of employing more people. But some of it's also making sure that we're providing more economic support to those families that are really struggling. And I talk about access to affordable health care. We need to do more to make sure that prescription drugs are less costly and more affordable. Right. We need to actually bolster Medicaid and bolster Medicare especially. I'm a big believer that we should lower the eligibility age for Medicare to 50 because a lot of people, even if they're not quite old enough to qualify for the Medicare age of 65, they're old enough where they're struggling to remain employed. They're struggling to get employer-provided health insurance. And we really need to make sure that more people have the option, at least, of participating in Medicare so that they can get that affordable health insurance.
And I'll give you one more. The fact of the amount of disease that's happening, the heart attacks, all that stuff has just increased. And it's not your typical 65, 70s.
It's hitting at younger ages.
Exactly. And up. And some of these people, they can't work. It's not that they're lazy. They just don't have the health to be able to work.
Exactly. You're so right about that. And the other thing, and you got to make it reasonable, but I'm a big believer that we are long overdue for an increase in the federal minimum wage. We've seen prices skyrocket. The federal minimum wage hasn't moved in many years. We need to see a boost in the federal minimum wage, and we need to index it to inflation at the federal level, just like we do here in Michigan. It's indexed to inflation for the state minimum wage. It should also be indexed to inflation at the federal level.
So the argument behind that is, well, then businesses can't afford to hire people, right?
And that's why it's got to be reasonable. You can't go bonkers with it. But at the same time, if we want everyday people to be able to afford to shop at those businesses, to buy goods, to buy services, they got to be able to make a decent living. And it's really about rewarding people who are willing to work hard, play by the rules, do the right thing. And if they can't make a decent living by working, they're going to end up on welfare. They're going to resort to other means that aren't productive. And so we really want to make sure that we're incentivizing work. Again, it's got to be within reason because we don't want to overly burden, especially small businesses. But we need to make sure that people truly do have a pathway to the middle-class American dream if they're willing to work hard.
Yeah. And I think also one of the things is companies should be interested in helping tuition. If somebody's interested in reskilling, upskilling, there should be something set aside for that person that they can do that. And in Foster's, it's only good for the company. I don't see a lot of companies doing that anymore.
Well, it's true. And I think part of the reason we don't see that as much as we should is the labor force has become so much more mobile. And I think a lot of companies are scared, hey, if this person comes in and I invest a lot in training them, they're going to leave and go to another employer, and I, the business owner, won't see that return on investment. And I think that's another area where government can step up to the plate and help match some of those employer investments in training so that employers are more confident that they'll get the return on investment on their dollar, because it's in everybody's interest to have a better trained, more well-educated workforce, and employers need to step up to the plate, but government also needs to be part of the solution there.
Excellent. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is health.
Yeah.
Okay. This has been a chronic problem, and it's not just, in youth and, the elderly people, but our health as a nation is deteriorating, right? Our foods are all chemically. I see they're trying to do some things at the federal level, but what's your take on that? I mean...
Yeah, it's a lot of this really does come down to personal responsibility. The government certainly has a role to play in making sure that food is not poisonous. The FDA obviously has an important role to play here. But at the same time, we want to maintain some reasonable choice for consumers as well. And so I don't know that a lot of people want the government to be too heavy-handed when it comes to regulating food options and food choices. I've always opposed any kind of tax on sugar or those kind of sin taxes on food, because I think it impinges on free choice, but I also think it drives up the cost of certain foods. So I'm a big believer that, yes, you want some basic regulations there through the FDA, but a lot of this comes down to personal choice, both in terms of what people eat, but also people choosing to exercise more. And I'm certainly not the poster child for exercising more or eating healthy all the time. So I don't,
Well, I think
I
it's a
don't mean it
combination
from
of
that.
all those things.
Well, that's right. Exactly. It's
and
a balance.
I also think, to your point, the schools need to get more involved.
Well,
some of the menus
absolutely.
I've seen, my sons are both, one's a college now, he's at
Yes.
school, and I look at this menu and I'm like, what is this stuff?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. When I talk about people having the right to free choice, I'm really talking about adults, because
gotcha.
adults obviously are old enough to know better and to make informed decisions. When it comes to young people, we really need to ensure that they're in an environment that steers them in a healthy direction. And schools are a prime example of that. Schools have a captive audience, if you will, for breakfast and lunch. Yes, kids can bring their lunch from home, but a lot of kids, for a variety of reasons, either don't do that. Maybe they're on the free or subsidized school lunch program or
Right.
breakfast program recently, of
Or
course.
convenience.
Well,
Apparently,
that's right.
don't have the time to
Well,
make their
exactly.
lunches,
And, and now, in the past couple of years, Michigan has offered free school lunches to all kids, regardless of income. So more and more kids are participating in those lunches through the school, and those lunches have got to be healthier for kids.
That's my point. We've got
Exactly.
that whole food pyramid thing, I think, is just outdated.
Right.
And I think it needs to be switched around. We
Oh,
need
yeah. I mean, you
more
go back
vegetables, more fruits.
100%. I mean, I remember when I was in elementary school, they used to teach the four basic
Right.
food groups, and it was like meat and fruits and vegetables, dairy,
Right.
bread. A lot of that bread and carbohydrates isn't exactly the healthiest thing these days.
Yeah.
And too much meat is obviously a problem too. So we really need to retool how people think about healthy diets, how people think about healthy food, and then make sure that the school offerings for lunchtime and in vending machines, which are increasingly common in schools, really mirror healthy choices, because a lot of those important lifelong habits start when kids are young.
Absolutely. So now you've got this new mission ahead of you. What are some really quick things that you'd like to see, if you were elected into this?
Yeah. Well, number one, we've got to have a more rational economic policy at the federal government. Certainly, targeted tariffs can make some sense if they're strategic, if they're narrowly tailored and targeted towards bad actors in the world. Mm-hmm. But to levy tariffs across the board on every country, including Canada, obviously doesn't make any sense. It's disruptive to supply chains. It's resulted in the idling of certain auto plants here in Michigan and short-term layoffs for auto workers. It drives up the cost of goods across the board. And so the reckless and chaotic approach that we've seen to tariffs really doesn't make any sense. So we need to make sure that we have a rational approach that is good for economic growth here, also good to try to keep prices low and avoid the runaway inflation that we've seen in recent years.
Okay.
That's number one. Number two, we've got to make sure that the Federal Reserve maintains its independence. That's going to be really important to make sure that we're controlling inflation and that the Federal Reserve has the ability to make rational economic decisions. We need to make sure we're doing more again to ensure that more Americans can make decent money, but also that we're controlling the costs that people face, especially when it comes to medical costs. Again, I know I talked about this earlier, but we've got to do more to facilitate more affordable health care for Americans, including bringing down the cost of prescription drugs.
We're running out of time. I appreciate you coming down, Tim. Thank you so much. We'll have you back on a series of another class, and we'll go over some of the discussion.
I really enjoyed this. Thanks, AJ.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Bye.